When Florida announced it was releasing thousands of snake-killing predators into the Everglades, the world laughed. Headlines called it reckless. Commenters called it insane. But beneath that swamp, over 90% of the region's medium-sized mammals had already vanished. Marsh rabbits placed in python territory were dying at a rate of 77%. An entire ecosystem was collapsing in total silence, and nobody was talking about it. The real question was never whether Florida's plan was crazy. It was what had gone so catastrophically wrong that this became the only option left. Long before the first python slithered into the Everglades, water defined everything. For thousands of years, a slow, shallow river, hardly recognizable as a river at all, spread south from Lake Okeechobee. This sheet of water, moving only a few inches per day, flooded sawgrass prairies, nourished tree islands, and carved out sloughs teeming with life. Sawgrass, periphyton, and marl soils built up layer by layer, each season's rains and droughts shaping a mosaic of habitats. The entire ecosystem depended on the natural rhythm of flood and dry, a balance that made the Everglades one of the most unique wetlands on the planet. That balance began to unravel in the late 1800s. Engineers, chasing visions of farmland and growing cities, cut the first canals through the marsh. Water that once meandered south now rushed east and west, draining away into the ocean. By the time Everglades National Park was established in 1947, levees, dikes, and roadbeds like the Tamiami Trail had already sliced the landscape into compartments. What had been a single, interconnected wetland became a patchwork of isolated pools and artificially dry prairies. The park itself opened under stress, with half the historic water flow already diverted by canals such as L31W. The changes did not just dry the land, they rewrote the rules of survival. As overland flow dwindled, soil began to oxidize and collapse. Saltwater crept inland, threatening freshwater marshes. Nutrient loads, once kept in check by slow-moving water, spiked in places like shark slough, leading to algae blooms and the slow suffocation of periphyton mats. The food web, rooted in these mats and low-phosphorus sawgrass, started to fray at the edges. Waiting bird colonies shrank as their nesting grounds dried. Small mammals lost the shelter and food they needed to thrive. The Everglades was still wild, but the foundation had shifted. With the old flood cycles broken and habitats shrinking, the system grew brittle, vulnerable to whatever came next. In the silence left by receding water, new threats were already finding their way in. By the early 21st century, the Everglades' silence had grown deafening. Scientists pressed deeper into the marshes, expecting to find the usual scatter of raccoon prints, the flash of a bobcat's tail, the nervous dart of a marsh rabbit between sawgrass stems. Instead, the tracks were gone. Camera traps that once captured crowded scenes now recorded only empty water and wind. It wasn't just a feeling. Surveys revealed a collapse so severe it defied belief. Mammal sighting indices tracked along park roads and sloughs showed raccoons and opossums down by more than 90%. Bobcats, once common, had nearly vanished. Marsh rabbits, a keystone prey species, were all but erased from the landscape. The numbers painted a picture of an ecosystem in free fall. Between 1997 and 2011, USGS and FWC teams documented a near total disappearance of small and medium mammals across vast stretches of Everglades National Park. In some areas, raccoon and opossum counts dropped by 99%. White-tailed deer sightings plunged by 94%. The losses rippled outward. Fewer rabbits meant less food for hawks and panthers, unbalancing every rung of the food chain. Yet these crashes unfolded largely out of sight. Early monitoring programs, focused on water quality and vegetation, missed the slow-motion vanishing act. By the time researchers realized what was happening, the damage was nearly complete. Experiments to test the cause offered no comfort. In one study, biologists released 95 adult marsh rabbits into territory occupied by pythons. Within 11 months, 77% were killed by pythons. The rest fell to other predators or simply disappeared, leaving behind only radio collars and silence. What began as a subtle shift had become a biological crisis, invisible until it was almost irreversible. The scale of loss forced a reckoning, old strategies were failing, and the Everglades was running out of time. Inside the Everglades, Burmese pythons have rewritten the rules of invasion. Their biology is built for silent conquest. A single female, hidden in the dense sawgrass, can lay an average of 36 eggs in one clutch, sometimes as many as 100. Eggs are deposited in the humid dark of early summer, with the mother coiled tight around them, guarding until the last hatchling breaks free weeks later. Each year, this cycle repeats. Sexual maturity arrives quickly between 2 and 5 years, so juveniles born from one summer's clutch can themselves become breeders before the next flood season ends. Multiply these numbers across a landscape where few predators threaten adults, and the math turns relentless. Researchers tracking gravid females by radiotelemetry have documented not just the sheer size of clutches, but the resilience of the young. Despite high mortality from flooding or predators in the first weeks, enough survive to fuel exponential growth. Genetic studies reveal a population stitched together from multiple pet trait origins, with mitochondrial lineages from both Python biodiversity and the closely related Melurus complex. Even after a steep genetic bottleneck, the snakes retain enough diversity to adapt, switching prey, tolerating cold snaps, and pushing into new habitats. Camouflage is their silent weapon. Pythons vanish into the marsh, moving mostly at night, their patterned scales breaking up outlines against mud and grass. Field biologists describe them as ghosts, invisible until the moment a radio signal pings or a nest is uncovered. Diet studies show a menu that shifts with opportunity: rabbits, birds, rodents, even alligators. The result is a predator almost impossible to find, let alone remove. As one longtime python researcher put it, "You are not just looking for a needle in a haystack. The needle moves, breeds, and hides its own offspring." This is the biological engine behind the invasion, one that outpaces nearly every tool thrown against it. Efforts to stop the python invasion grew frantic. Wildlife managers threw every tool they had at the marshes. None seemed sharp enough. The annual Python Challenge brought in hundreds of hunters, armed with machetes, snake hooks, and hope. Over 17,000 pythons have been officially removed from South Florida since 2000, but every year the tally resets. For every snake caught, dozens more remain hidden, multiplying in silence. Financial bounties lured more hunters into the sawgrass. Some teams hauled out hundreds of pounds of snakes, yet the population estimates barely budged. The math was relentless. A single female could lay up to 100 eggs in a single clutch. Even if thousands were captured, tens of thousands slipped through the net, unseen and untouched. Technology promised a breakthrough. Drones scanned the marshes for heat signatures, but pythons burrowed under mud and water, their bodies blending into the thermal noise. Motion-activated cameras, so effective for tracking deer or panthers, captured little more than empty grass and flickers of wind. Biologists tried tracking scout snakes, implanting transmitters in captured males and releasing them to lead the way to breeding females. It worked sometimes, but the scale was overwhelming. Each nest destroyed meant 100 fewer hatchlings, but for every nest found, countless others hatched out of sight. Experimental traps, robotic lures, and even scent detection dogs joined the fight. Each new method brought a flicker of hope, quickly swallowed by the vastness of the Everglades. Removal programs logged their successes: 1,000 snakes in a year, 2,000 the next, but the marsh remained eerily quiet, stripped of rabbits, raccoons, and opossums. One removal program lead summed up the mood: "We are fighting a war with butterfly nets." The harder the teams worked, the clearer the impasse became. No amount of hunting or technology could keep pace with an enemy this invisible, this relentless. The Everglades was locked in a stalemate, and time was running out. Laboratory tables filled with Everglades specimens began to reveal a deeper unease. Necropsies on native mammals, rabbits, raccoons, even bobcats, yielded more than empty stomachs and python bite marks. Tissue samples preserved in chilled vials were sent for PCR analysis. The results returned with an unexpected pattern: a single pathogen present in multiple species, crossing the boundaries between predator and prey. What first seemed like isolated infections soon mapped a network of transmission threading through the food web. Each positive test, each amplified genetic sequence, pointed to a parasite moving silently between hosts, sometimes found in the muscle of a rabbit, sometimes in the blood of a raccoon, sometimes in the digestive tract of a python itself. The evidence no longer fit a story of simple predation. Disease ecologists, reviewing the data, described a multi-host pathogen with the potential to erode resilience across the ecosystem. One researcher put it plainly, "We are not just losing animals to snakes, we are watching something spread through the chain, undermining every rung." The crisis had widened. The Everglades was not just under siege from an invader, it was now the stage for an invisible contagion, one that could not be hunted or trapped. The need for a solution grew sharper, and the boundaries of the emergency blurred. A new plan appeared in the official record. It drew more snickers than support. In a series of carefully orchestrated releases, state and federal partners began returning eastern indigo snakes to select Florida habitats. The numbers were modest at first, 42 snakes in a single year, then more each season, tracked by microchips and radio transmitters. By 2023, just over 200 had been released, each one bred in captivity and vetted for disease. The agencies behind the effort read like a roll call of conservation: the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Nature Conservancy, and a handful of zoos and research centers. Their stated aim was clear: to rebuild a self-sustaining population of a native predator that had been wiped out decades before by habitat loss and fragmentation. But the public conversation rarely matched the seriousness of the science. Headlines poked fun at the idea of releasing more snakes into a state already infamous for invasive reptiles. Social media posts recycled old jokes about Florida's snake problem, now being solved by more snakes. Talk radio hosts dismissed the program as a bureaucratic oddity, a punchline in the ongoing saga of Florida wildlife management. Even among some policymakers, skepticism ran deep. Why spend millions breeding and tracking a threatened snake when the real emergency seemed to be the ones nobody could catch? Frustration simmered inside the agencies. One program lead replied that people see the word snake and stop listening, and that the teams were not adding chaos, they were trying to restore what had been lost. The gap between public perception and ecological reality had never been wider. Eastern indigo snakes are built for a job most creatures avoid. Stretching over 6 feet long, their scales shine blue-black in the sun, an unmistakable flash in the Florida undergrowth. But it is their appetite that sets them apart. Indigos are ophiophagus, snake eaters by design. Where most predators steer clear of venomous rivals, indigos hunt them. Cottonmouths, copperheads, even rattlesnakes are each a potential meal. Their physiology offers a rare advantage. Unlike most native snakes, indigos show a pronounced resistance to pit viper venom, a trait honed over thousands of years sharing territory with North America's deadliest serpents. This resistance does not make them invincible, but it gives them a margin that other predators lack. A margin that lets them seize, subdue, and swallow prey that would kill almost anything else in the marsh. Their hunting style is direct and relentless. Indigos overpower their targets with brute strength, pinning and constricting rather than relying on venom. They are active foragers, covering wide ground, moving through tangled roots and sawgrass, searching not just for snakes but for lizards, small mammals, and birds. Yet it is their role as a historic top predator of other snakes that drew scientists to them. Decades before the python invasion, indigos helped regulate native snake populations, keeping potential competitors in check. Their absence, caused by habitat loss and fragmentation, left a gap, a missing regulator in the food web. The logic behind the return is rooted in this history. By reintroducing indigos, biologists hope to restore a lost mechanism, a predator that can target young pythons and other invasive snakes, and perhaps over time help rebuild the subtle web of checks and balances that once defined the Everglades. Predators in the Everglades have not vanished. They watch, they adapt, and sometimes they strike back. Field cameras long focused on emptiness have begun capturing rare but unmistakable proof: native hunters confronting the python invader. In December 2022, a camera trap near Naples recorded a bobcat standing over the body of a 13-foot Burmese python, its head bitten clean off. Biologists later confirmed the bobcat had killed and cached the snake, a reversal of roles that once seemed impossible. Other footage reveals bobcats raiding python nests, eating eggs, and leaving behind scattered shells. Alligators too have been filmed taking young pythons in shallow water, jaws closing before the snake can escape. Each clip is a fragment, a glimpse of the old food web testing its strength against the new order. Even the elusive eastern indigo snake, tracked by radio transmitters, has been documented preying on juvenile snakes, including small pythons when the opportunity arises. These moments are not yet common, but they signal a subtle change. Predators are learning, and the python's reign is no longer absolute. For field biologists, each recorded encounter is more than a data point. It is a sign that the Everglades is not finished fighting for itself. Confirmation arrived not in headlines, but in the quiet language of field notes and genetic barcodes. In the autumn of 2023, biologists combing the sandhills at Apalachicola Bluffs and Ravines Preserve logged a discovery that had eluded them for years: 2 eastern indigo snake hatchlings, unmistakably wild-born, their scales still bearing the faint sheen of new life. Each tiny serpent was measured, photographed, and scanned for microchips. None were found. Blood samples were taken, then cross-checked against the DNA of every adult released since the program's start. The verdict was clear. These hatchlings were the offspring of snakes born in captivity, but now, for the first time in decades, bred and hatched in the wild. Protocols left little room for doubt. Field teams had installed drift fences and pitfall traps, checked daily through the late summer hatching window. Every captured juvenile underwent a battery of tests, morphology, genetic markers, even pathogen screens, to rule out accidental releases or stowaways from other populations. The results confirmed what the program lead put simply: we have proof of natural recruitment. For the restoration effort, this was the threshold they had been waiting for. The moment when a vanished predator was no longer just a guest, but a participant, capable of sustaining itself, of rewriting its own story into the landscape. The evidence didn't announce victory, but it did offer a rare kind of hope, a sign that the system, battered and diminished, could still respond to careful intervention. This restoration was no longer hypothetical. It was alive, and it was growing. Today, the Everglades stand as a battleground where chaos meets intervention. Every new predator released is a wager, one that the ecosystem, not humans, will ultimately resolve. As invasive species reshape landscapes worldwide, Florida's gamble is no anomaly. The true danger isn't in acting boldly, it is in mistaking silence for stability. In this era of ecological upheaval, the cost of inaction is measured in vanished worlds. What would you risk to restore balance?